Now, the breaking news this hour, the man credited with revolutionising how we use technology, Steve Jobs, has died. Apple says its visionary co-founder passed away today after a long battle with cancer. Darren Osborne is the ABC's science reporter, and he's been a Steve Jobs fan for decades. And Peter Ryan is our business editor as well. Welcome, gentlemen. Darren Osborne, a big fan. How do you feel after this news today?
A little bit upset. I think we've known about this now for a couple of years, and particularly even in the last few weeks when Steve stood down as CEO last month of Apple. So it's something that's been coming, but I think still for a lot of technology fans, it's a big shock to hear the news.
Just how significant has he been?
Oh, look, going right back to the late 70s, early 80s. I mean, he has helped define computer technology and, more recently, mobile phone technology, and even the delivery of things such as music and movies. I mean, going way back to the Apple II, which is the computer that I learned how to program on back at high school. I mean, he created a computer platform that a lot of people took on board, and then in the late 90s, when he came back to Apple, he reinvigorated the company. He then came out with the iPod, the iPhone, and the iTunes Store, and we've seen now a huge change in the way in which we use personal computing devices.
And Peter, just explain for us how significant a company Apple is.
Well, just look at the man. This is someone who built Apple up out of a garage business, a garage startup, and take that forward today, everything that he's been through. How many people watching ABC News 24 have an iPhone? I know it's not product placement, but this is actually part of society.
Can we play some of your tunes on that now as well?
I could. They'd all be ABC related,
but that's the amazing thing. Like 10 years ago, who would have thought you could pick this up and play tunes and show movies and do all the things we can do?
And that's right. That's why Apple is more than a technology company. It's more than just a technology company that happens to be worth $370 billion on Wall Street, but it's a company that has changed society, and there'd be a lot of people out there who either own an iPhone or an iPad or an iMac and who've grown up with it, that see it part of their lifestyle. And I've heard a remark this morning that Steve Jobs was the Edison of his era, in that how could we do without electricity or the electric light these days?
Well, Darren Osborne, we've heard the Facebook story told in a movie, and we've heard so much about Bill Gates over the years. Tell us a bit about the Steve Jobs story. He was a bit of a hippie to begin with, was he?
Yeah, I mean, he spent some time in India. He had an interesting upbringing. I think his parents were from Syria. I'd have to look that up again. But I mean, he came to California. He met Steve Wozniak, who was the other co-founder of Apple back in the late 70s. And really, they were kind of, I hate to use the cliche, but yin and yang. I mean, Steve was the marketing side of Apple, whereas Steve Wozniak was the brains behind it, and it was only because those two were able to work together that I think Apple became the success that it did very early on.
So Steve Jobs was the brains behind it.
Steve Jobs was more the marketing side. He knew what people wanted. And that's went right through his whole career. I mean, he was able to look at computing devices and see how they should be made so that people wanted to use them. I mean, the big thing that a lot of people comment about Apple products is that their user interface is so easy to pick up. You can pick up the devices. And I was going to say that even though, their products are in a lot of hands today, even products from other companies today who are always playing catch-up, it seems, to Apple, they have taken on board a lot of the lessons or a lot of the innovation that Steve Jobs and the company have put together.
And what's that relationship been like over the years between Jobs and Wozniak? Has there ever been any strain in that? Because we hear with these partnerships inevitably that there are some strains, or have they been close the whole way through Apple's success?
No, definitely not. I think a few years ago I read Steve Wozniak's biography, I Was, and it tells a very interesting tale of how I think they came together at the right time, and then after a few years realised that they were two very different people, and hence they ended up going their separate ways. In fact, Steve Wozniak, I think, left Apple a few years earlier. I think he left around about 1984.
Okay.
Steve Jobs left a few years later, only because he was kind of forced by the board into a minor position, and he actually left and formed a number of other companies, including what became Pixar Pictures, and he was brought back to the company in the late 90s when it was really suffering. But those two, they've never really had an easy relationship, and you don't see them very often. It'd be interesting to see what Steve Wozniak's reaction will be today.
And just picking up on that, he was forced out of the company in a corporate coup in 1997, and it shows a high level of resilience for a man who actually began business without any business skills or accounting skills, but shows that resilience that he took off. He said, okay, my job's gone at Apple, I'm going to go off and set up this other company, I think it was called Next.
Yep.
But they had to bring him back, and it was Steve Jobs that brought back Apple back on track and made it the great company that it is today.
Which brings me to the next question. There's been a lot of talk in the last 24, 48 hours about this iPhone 4S launch and how weird it was not having Steve Jobs there for that moment. How has Apple suffered already from Steve Jobs not being at the forefront of that company?
Well, keep in mind that he's been on sick leave effectively since January, when I think that his illness was announced, and he made the point that while he was co-founder and chairman, that he wasn't the only person in the company who developed this technology, although he was the inspiration and the leadership. And you don't see this in a lot of other companies, but some pretty big succession planning has gone on there. It hasn't really affected the share price, although in the lead up to this announcement, Apple shares went into a trading halt on Wall Street. But if you actually just look at the share price, $378 a share. And as I said earlier, you know, this company is built up to have a market capitalisation of $370 billion US. And I think that despite that lack of formal skills, this man was a true leader and will be missed by the industry.
Darren, what was your sense with that iPhone 4S launch over the last couple of days?
I think it was a reflection of how much expectation Apple has created over the last few years, and that every time they have one of these big media events, it seems as though something revolutionary is going to be put out, and it wasn't the case in this one. I mean, some people called it more of an evolution than a revolution announcement yesterday, where it was just a small step. What it's created, though, I've noticed, particularly in the Twitter sphere, is that now people are anticipating the next version even more, because they expect if there's just that small jump, maybe they're working on something really big to announce. And that could happen in January, when they usually have their big Macworld conference over in the US.
Are you going to be there for that?
I'd love to. I don't think I'll be making it, though.
I guess it raises the issue too that expectations are so high of these products from Apple. That
how much further can they take
What's the next best thing? Is it going to cook your dinner for you? We all remember the internet refrigerator at the beginning of the internet. That didn't go anywhere. But seriously, the expectations out of Apple are huge, and you have to wonder what else will you be able to do with this with these devices.
Well, I noticed with the iPhone 4S yesterday, they were saying that they had a personal assistant application. I was wondering what the personal assistant was going to be doing. How much further can they take it?
Yeah, look, who knows where it will go. But I think the true test of Apple now is going to be to see what sort of legacy has Steve Jobs left in amongst the people that are there, particularly those at the top. We've seen, you know, Microsoft have gone through the area where Bill Gates has left. He left a few years ago. Steve Ballmer has taken over. Nothing big has come out of the company sort of since then, but they've still motored along. It'll be interesting to see if Apple sort of end up going down that same path, where maybe they don't become the innovator anymore, or have they left, you know, such a legacy at the top that there are still some great minds in there that will come out with those wow, gee whiz products.
Okay, well, no doubt we'll have more on this through the day, but Darren Osborne and Peter Ryan, thanks very much.